Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Station, looking out at the dark space around Luna. The warning lights flashed red across every screen in the command center. His hands gripped the metal rail as he watched the sensors pick up something that made his blood run cold. Ships were appearing at the edge of the solar system, but these were not human ships. The alien fleet materialized like ghosts becoming real. First one ship, then 10, then hundreds, then thousands. Each vessel was black as the void of space itself, with smooth curves that seemed to bend light around them. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, like deadly predators that had evolved to be perfect killing machines. Captain Lisa Grant ran up to Morrison with a datapad in her hands. Her face was pale and her voice shook as she spoke. The largest ship in the alien fleet was sending a transmission directly to Earth. The message was coming through on all frequencies at once, drowning out every other signal in the solar system. Morrison took the pad and read the decoded message. It was written in perfect English, which somehow made it even more frightening. The words were simple and direct, like a judge reading a death sentence. Humanity had exactly 36 hours to surrender completely to the Caltharian Empire, or every human being would be killed. Dr. Nathan Brooks arrived at the station within an hour of the message. He had been studying alien cultures and military tactics for 20 years, preparing for this exact moment. His research files contained information about over 50 different species that had encountered the Caltharian Empire. None of those species existed anymore. Brooks spread his reports across the conference table as Morrison and Grant gathered around. The pattern was always the same. The Empire would arrive at a world with overwhelming force and give the inhabitants a short time to surrender. If they surrendered, they became slaves and their world was stripped of all resources. If they refused, they were wiped out completely. There was never a third option. President Helen Carter called an emergency meeting with leaders from every nation on Earth. The room was filled with generals, admirals, scientists, and politicians, all trying to find a solution to an impossible problem. The alien ships had weapons that could crack planets in half. Earth's most powerful weapons were like throwing stones at a mountain. Commander Ryan Hayes of the Space Marines argued that they should start evacuating important people to the colonies on Mars and Europa. At least some humans might survive if they scattered across the solar system. General Amy Foster disagreed and said they should try to negotiate with the aliens. Maybe they could find some kind of compromise that would save most of humanity. Morrison listened to the arguments, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the intelligence reports that had been coming in for months. Human scouts had been intercepting alien communications from across the galaxy. The messages painted a picture of an empire that had been growing for thousands of years, consuming every civilization it encountered. As the hours passed, more information came in about the alien fleet. Their ships were powered by technology that humans barely understood. They had weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single shot. Their shields could stop anything Earth had ever built. By every measure that mattered, humanity was completely outmatched. The Caltharian ambassador appeared on screen exactly 12 hours after the first message. He called himself Vextai, and his appearance was both humanoid and completely alien. His skin was gray like old metal, and his eyes were black holes that seemed to absorb light. When he spoke, his voice had no emotion at all. Vextai explained that the Caltharian Empire had been watching humanity for decades. They had seen how quickly humans developed new technology and how they spread across their solar system. The Empire had decided that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to continue existing. This was not a conquest, but an extermination. Brooks studied every word of the transmission and compared it to his research on other fallen civilizations. The aliens always said the same things about being dangerous or problematic. It was just an excuse they used to justify genocide. The real reason was simpler and more terrifying. The Empire destroyed other species because it could. Morrison walked through the corridors of the defense station and saw the faces of his crew. They were trying to stay calm and do their jobs, but everyone knew what was coming. In less than 24 hours, the most powerful military force in the galaxy was going to try to kill every human being alive. The president made a final broadcast to Earth 6 hours before the deadline. She told people to stay with their families and not to panic. She said that humanity had faced extinction before and had always found a way to survive. But everyone who heard her voice could tell that she did not believe her own words. Grant brought Morrison the final intelligence reports. as the last few hours ticked away. Human monitoring stations across the solar system had been listening to communications between the alien ships. The messages were in a language that human computers could not translate, but the tone was clear. The aliens were not preparing to accept surrender. They were preparing for war. Morrison looked out at the alien fleet one more time and made his decision. He activated the deep space communication array and sent a coded message to stations hidden throughout the galaxy. The message was just 3 words long, but it would change everything. He typed slowly and carefully, then pressed the send button. Dr. Palmer received the message at her laboratory on Mars and immediately began powering up equipment that had been hidden for years. Captain Torres got the signal on his stealth ship and started moving toward the alien fleet. Engineer Rodriguez activated systems on Earth's orbital platforms that were not supposed to exist. The 36 hours were almost up, but Morrison was no longer watching the countdown timer. He was watching his own screens as responses started coming in from across the galaxy. Humans were not the only ones who had been waiting for this moment. The Caltharian Empire had made enemies on every world they had conquered, and those enemies had been preparing for revenge. Morrison smiled for the first time in days as he realized the truth. The aliens thought they were hunting sheep, but they had found wolves instead. Humanity had been preparing for this war much longer than anyone knew, and they were not going to face it alone. Colonel Ben Shaw stood in the underground facility buried 3 miles beneath the Sahara Desert. The complex had been built in secret over 15 years, disguised as a geological research station. Now it was about to serve its true purpose as the most powerful communication array ever. Constructed by human hands, Shaw activated the quantum transmitter and sent Morrison's coded message, racing across the galaxy at speeds that defied the known laws of physics. The message reached distant worlds in minutes instead of years, using technology that humanity had reverse-engineered from alien artifacts recovered decades ago. Project Defiance was no longer just a plan. It was happening. Dr. Kate Palmer worked frantically in her laboratory on Mars, surrounded by equipment that officially did not exist. The quantum manipulation technology she had developed could break apart the molecular bonds that held matter together. She had tested it on small samples with devastating results. Now she was preparing to use it against ships the size of cities. Palmer's hands moved quickly over the control panels as she brought the weapon systems online. The technology was based on principles that human science had discovered by accident when studying crashed alien vessels. The Caltharians had been careless with their technology, never imagining that primitive humans could understand and improve upon their designs. Captain Alex Torres commanded the stealth ship Silent Runner as it drifted invisible through the alien fleet. His vessel was coated with materials that absorbed sensor beams and bent light around its hull. The ship had been observing Caltharian forces for 5 years, gathering intelligence while staying completely undetected. Torres studied the massive alien vessels through his ship's sensors and identified their weakness. Every Caltharian fleet was controlled by a single command ship that coordinated the movements and attacks of all other vessels. If that ship could be destroyed, the entire fleet would lose its ability to fight as a unified force. The Silent Runner had been modified with weapons salvaged from alien crash sites. The torpedoes in its launch tubes contained the same quantum technology that Palmer was preparing on Mars. Each torpedo could punch through Caltharian shields and tear apart their hull plating like paper. Engineer Maya Rodriguez worked on Earth's orbital defense platforms, making modifications that had been planned for years. The platforms looked like normal satellite defense systems to any casual observer. But Rodriguez had been secretly installing alien weapon technology recovered from various crash sites around the world. Rodriguez's team had spent months learning how to operate Caltharian energy weapons and shield generators. The technology was incredibly advanced, but it followed logical principles that human engineers could understand and copy. The orbital platforms now packed firepower that could rival alien warships. The modifications had been disguised as routine maintenance and software updates. Even most of the human military did not know what Rodriguez had actually installed on the platforms. The secret had been kept by a small group of engineers and scientists who had been preparing for this war since the first alien artifacts were recovered. Lieutenant Commander Chris Parker sat in a hidden communication center and sent activation signals to resistance cells on 17 different worlds. These cells were composed of survivors from species that the Caltharian Empire thought they had completely conquered. Parker had spent years making contact with these groups and coordinating their activities. Parker's messages triggered uprisings that had been planned for decades. On the Zathari homeworld, hidden weapons caches were opened and distributed to freedom fighters. On the Novan colonies, saboteurs prepared to destroy mining equipment and supply depots. On dozens of other worlds, the survivors of genocide prepared to strike back at their oppressors. The resistance cells had been supplied with human-made weapons and communication equipment. Humanity had been secretly arming rebels across the galaxy, turning every conquered world into a potential battleground. The Caltharian Empire was about to discover that their victims had not forgotten and had not forgiven. Brooks coordinated the intelligence networks that had been gathering information on Caltharian weaknesses for years. Human agents disguised as traders and explorers had been mapping enemy supply lines, identifying key installations, and recruiting allies among the Empire's enemies. The intelligence operation had revealed that the Caltharian Empire was not as strong as it appeared. Their military was stretched thin across thousands of worlds, and they relied on fear and overwhelming force to maintain control. If that fear could be broken, their entire system would collapse. Morrison received reports from all the secret operations as the final hour approached. Humanity had been preparing for this war much longer than anyone realized. The public saw only Earth's small space fleet and primitive weapons, but the real strength of humanity lay in its hidden alliances and secret technologies. The preparations were almost complete when the Caltharian deadline arrived. Palmer's quantum weapons were charged and ready. Torres was in position to strike at the command ship. Rodriguez had armed the orbital platforms with alien technology. Parker had activated rebel cells across the galaxy. Shaw's communication array was broadcasting continuously now, coordinating the actions of human forces and their alien allies throughout the galaxy. The message traffic was enormous as hundreds of worlds prepared to strike simultaneously at the Caltharian Empire Grant, monitored the alien fleet from the Earth Defense Station, and watched for any sign that they had detected humanity's preparations. The Caltharians seemed confident that they were facing a primitive and helpless species. They had no idea that they had walked into the largest trap in galactic history. Morrison stood on his bridge and watched the countdown timer reach 0. The 36 hours were up, and it was time for humanity to show the galaxy what they were really made of. He opened a communication channel to the Caltharian fleet and prepared to deliver a message that would be remembered for thousands of years. The war that was about to begin would not be between an empire and a primitive world. It would be between tyranny and freedom, between oppression and liberation. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment, and they were ready to show the galaxy that some species could not be conquered or destroyed. Palmer's finger hovered over the firing control for her quantum weapons. Torres prepared to attack the Caltharian command ship. Rodriguez powered up the orbital defense platforms. Parker gave the final activation signal to rebel cells across 17 worlds. The trap was ready to be sprung. Admiral Morrison opened the communication channel to the Caltharian fleet and every other species in the galaxy. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke words that would echo through history. He told the galaxy that Earth was now forbidden territory, and that any attack on humanity would bring consequences beyond imagination. Ambassador. Vextai appeared on the main screen with what looked like amusement on his alien features. He began to respond to what he thought was desperate bluffing from a primitive species. The Caltharian Empire had heard similar threats from hundreds of worlds before destroying them, but Vextai never finished his reply. Dr. Palmer fired her quantum weapons from Mars and watched 3 Caltharian command ships simply vanish in brilliant flashes of light. The molecular bonds holding their hulls together were torn apart at the atomic level. The massive vessels that had seemed indestructible moments before became expanding clouds of their basic elements. The quantum effect spread through the alien ships like a virus, following the same molecular patterns that made up Caltharian technology. More ships began to break apart as the destabilization wave moved through their fleet. Palmer had turned their own advanced materials against them. Captain Torres brought the silent runner out of stealth mode right in the middle of the enemy formation. His ship appeared like a ghost, becoming solid as the cloaking field shut down. Before the aliens could react, he fired every torpedo his ship carried at the central command vessel. The torpedoes punched through Caltharian shields as if they were made of paper. Each one carried a quantum charge that tore holes in the command ship's hull and destroyed its central computer systems. The vessel that coordinated the entire fleet was dead in space within seconds. Without their central command ship, the Caltharian fleet fell into chaos. Ships began firing in random directions as their coordination network collapsed. Some vessels attacked their own allies in the confusion. The Empire's greatest strength, their perfect unity and coordination, had become their fatal weakness. Maya Rodriguez activated Earth's orbital defense platforms and revealed their hidden weapons. Energy beams lanced out from the satellites and struck Caltharian ships with power that matched their own advanced technology. The platforms that had looked like simple defense systems were actually armed with weapons, reverse-engineered from alien crash sites. The Caltharian ships tried to return fire but found that Earth's defenses were stronger than expected. Rodriguez had installed shield generators based on Empire technology, creating barriers that could deflect their most powerful weapons. The aliens were fighting their own technology turned against them. Chris Parker watched his communication screens as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The resistance cells he had activated were striking simultaneously on 17 different worlds. Decades of preparation were paying off as the Empire's conquered territories erupted in rebellion. On the Zathari homeworld, freedom fighters emerged from hidden bases and attacked Caltharian garrison forces. The rebels were armed with human weapons and used tactics taught by human military advisors. What the Empire thought was a pacified world turned into a battlefield. The Novan colony seized control of 3 entire star systems as rebel forces destroyed mining equipment and captured supply depots. The Crystalline Collective cut off trade routes that the Empire depended on for resources. Dozens of other species joined the uprising as news of Earth's resistance spread. Brooks monitored intelligence reports from across the galaxy and realized that the plan was working better than anyone had hoped. The Empire's forces were stretched thin and could not respond to simultaneous attacks on so many fronts. Fear of the all-powerful Caltharians was turning into hope for freedom. The alien fleet around Earth began to retreat as more ships fell to Palmer's quantum weapons and Torres's torpedo attacks. Ambassador Vextai's flagship was trying to escape when Rodriguez targeted it with the orbital platforms. The ship's shields failed under the concentrated fire, and it broke apart in a shower of debris. Morrison watched the destruction and felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Humanity had proven they could fight back against impossible odds, but the cost would be enormous. The Empire would not accept this defeat quietly. They would return with everything they had. Grant received reports from monitoring stations throughout the solar system. The retreating Caltharian ships were sending distress calls back to their home territory. They were calling for reinforcements and describing Earth's defenses in terms that suggested shock and disbelief. Torres brought the silent runner back toward Earth after confirming that the central command ship was completely destroyed. His mission had been a complete success, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Empire had thousands of fleets scattered across the galaxy, and they would all be heading toward Earth soon. Palmer powered down her quantum weapons and began analyzing the battle data. Her technology had worked even better than expected, but she had used up most of her prepared charges. She would need time to build more weapons, and time was something humanity might not have. Rodriguez coordinated with defense stations throughout the solar system as Earth's magnetic field began to change. The planet's natural magnetosphere was being amplified by hidden generators based on alien technology. An invisible barrier was forming around Earth that would disable any ship trying to approach. The magnetic field modification was the final phase of Earth's defense plan. No Caltharian vessel would be able to get close enough to attack the planet directly, but Morrison knew that the Empire had weapons that could destroy worlds from a safe distance. Parker continued coordinating with resistance cells as the rebellion spread to more worlds. Species that had been conquered decades ago were rising up against their oppressors. The galaxy was learning that the Caltharian Empire could be defeated. Shaw's communication array broadcast the news of Earth's victory to every inhabited world in the galaxy. The message was simple but powerful. Humanity had faced the Empire's ultimatum and not only survived but won. The age of Caltharian dominance was ending. Brooks compiled his final report on the battle and realized that everything had changed. Earth was no longer an isolated world on the edge of the galaxy. Humanity had become the center of a galactic revolution against tyranny. The real war was just beginning. Morrison looked out at the debris field that had once been a Caltharian fleet and prepared for what he knew was coming next. The Empire would not accept this humiliation. They would send their most powerful forces to destroy Earth and crush the rebellion, but humanity was ready for them. Emperor Zakthul arrived at the edge of the solar system with the Grand Armada, a fleet of 50,000 warships that had never known defeat in 3,000 years of conquest. The ruler of the Caltharian Empire was a being of immense age and power, who had personally overseen the destruction of countless civilizations. The Emperor's flagship was larger than most human cities and carried weapons that could tear holes in space itself. The ship's hull was made from materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making it nearly impossible to destroy. Surrounding it were the most elite vessels in the Empire's military, each one capable of destroying planets. Dr. Brooks analyzed the new threat from his command center on Europa and realized that humanity was facing something far worse than the First Fleet. The Grand Armada included reality distortion engines that could change the laws of physics in local space. They had temporal weapons that could erase targets from history itself. Brooks shared his findings with Morrison and explained that the Emperor was not just planning to destroy Earth, he intended to make it so that humanity had never existed at all, wiping them from the timeline and undoing everything they had accomplished. The rebellion would die before it had ever been born. General Foster coordinated with resistance cells throughout the galaxy as the Empire began its retaliation against the rebellious worlds. The Zathari homeworld was being bombarded with weapons that turned entire continents into molten lava. The atmosphere was being stripped away, leaving nothing but a dead rock floating in space. The Novan colonies faced an even worse fate as Caltharian forces deployed biological weapons that consumed all organic matter. Entire ecosystems were dissolving into gray sludge as the nanomachines spread across the planets. Billions of beings were dying as the Empire demonstrated the price of defying their rule. Foster watched the reports and felt sick at the destruction being caused by humanity's rebellion. She had known that fighting back would bring retaliation, but seeing the scale of death was almost unbearable. The Empire was making an example that would terrify the galaxy into submission. Captain Grant intercepted communications from neutral species throughout the galaxy and realized the Emperor's strategy. Representatives from hundreds of uncommitted worlds were being forced to watch the destruction of the rebel planets. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who oppose the Empire. Grant shared the intelligence with Morrison and explained that the Emperor was planning to use Earth's destruction as the final demonstration. By showing neutral species what happened to the rebels, he would secure the submission of the entire galaxy without having to fight for it. Maya Rodriguez discovered through her monitoring networks that the Emperor's plan went beyond simple demonstration. Hidden human colonies throughout the galaxy were being hunted down by special Caltharian forces. The Empire had learned that humans were supporting rebellions on every world and was trying to eliminate them completely. Rodriguez realized that humanity's greatest strength, their ability to inspire and coordinate other species, had also become their greatest vulnerability. The Empire now saw humans as the source of all rebellion and was determined to wipe them out everywhere they could be found. Morrison received desperate messages from human colonies and advisory teams scattered across dozens of worlds. Some were under direct attack by Caltharian forces. Others were trapped by the military crackdowns on rebel planets. All of them were asking for evacuation or reinforcement that Earth could not provide. The Admiral made the hardest decision of his life and told the scattered humans that they were on their own. Earth's defenses could not be weakened by sending rescue missions. The colonies and advisors would have to survive using their own resources and the help of their alien allies. Dr. Palmer worked frantically to prepare more quantum weapons as reports came in about the Grand Armada's capabilities. Her original technology was effective against normal Caltharian ships, but the Emperor's flagship existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Standard quantum disruption might not work against it. Palmer began modifying her weapons to operate across dimensional barriers, using theories that pushed human science to its absolute limits. She was essentially trying to destroy something that existed in several realities at once. The mathematics alone were enough to drive researchers insane. Captain Torres took the silent runner on reconnaissance missions to study the Grand Armada and found that conventional tactics would be useless against such a massive force. The fleet was protected by overlapping shield networks that covered thousands of cubic kilometers of space. No single ship could penetrate such defenses. Torres realized that the only way to hurt the Grand Armada was to turn its size against itself. If the fleet could be tricked into firing on its own ships, the confusion might create openings for targeted strikes. But getting 50,000 ships to attack each other would require perfect timing and enormous luck. Chris Parker lost contact with several resistance cells as the Empire's crackdown intensified. Entire worlds were being sterilized to prevent future rebellions. The survivors were being relocated to prison planets where they could be watched constantly. The galactic uprising was being crushed with overwhelming brutality. Parker managed to maintain communication with some of the stronger resistance groups and began coordinating a desperate plan. If Earth was going to be destroyed anyway, the remaining rebels would launch simultaneous suicide attacks on major Caltharian installations. They would hurt the Empire as much as possible before being wiped out. Brooks analyzed intelligence about the Emperor himself and discovered that Zakthul had a weakness that might be exploited. The ruler's consciousness was linked to his flagship through quantum entanglement technology. If the ship could be damaged in the right way, it might be possible to hurt the Emperor directly. Morrison studied the tactical reports and realized that humanity was facing impossible odds. The Grand Armada had more firepower than the entire First Fleet, and they were prepared for Earth's quantum weapons and defensive systems. Traditional military thinking said that surrender was the only rational option, but Morrison was not thinking like a traditional military commander. He was thinking like a human, and humans had a reputation for doing impossible things when their survival was at stake. Earth had surprised the Empire once by being prepared for war. Maybe they could surprise them again by being prepared for something else entirely. The Grand Armada moved into attack position as the Emperor prepared to demonstrate his power to the watching galaxy. 50,000 ships arranged themselves in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready to erase Earth from existence. But Morrison was no longer worried about the fleet attacking his planet. He was worried about what would happen when Palmer's modified quantum weapons hit the Emperor's flagship and the resulting explosion. Spread across multiple dimensions simultaneously, the battle that was about to begin would either save the galaxy or destroy it completely. Emperor Zakthul activated his temporal manipulation technology and attempted to bypass Earth's magnetic barrier by attacking the planet before its defenses had been built. The massive weapons reached back through time itself, trying to destroy humanity in the past when they were still vulnerable and unprepared. But instead of finding a primitive world, the Emperor's forces encountered something impossible. Dr. Palmer's quantum research had evolved far beyond simple molecular disruption. Her new weapons operated across multiple dimensions and timelines simultaneously, creating defenses that existed in the past, present, and future at the same time. The Grand Armada found itself fighting not just Earth's current defenses but duplicate versions of itself pulled from alternate realities. Ships that had been destroyed in the first battle were somehow fighting again. Vessels that had never been built were firing weapons that did not exist. The battle was taking place across multiple timelines simultaneously. Admiral Morrison watched from his command center as the Emperor's temporal weapons backfired catastrophically. The Caltharian fleet was attacking copies of itself in dozens of different realities. Every shot they fired at Earth was hitting their own ships in alternate timelines. The Grand Armada was destroying itself while trying to attack humanity. Palmer's dimensional weapons had turned the Empire's greatest strength against them once again. Their advanced technology became a liability when it was used by someone who understood it better than they did. The quantum effects were spreading through the fleet like a virus, causing ships to fade in and out of existence. Captain Torres led the counterattack as combined resistance fleets arrived from across the galaxy. The survivors of the Empire's retaliation had not given up. Instead, they had united under human coordination and brought their remaining forces to defend Earth. The final battle would be fought by every free species in the Galaxy, the Zathari brought their phase shift technology, allowing their ships to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The Novans contributed gravity weapons that could crush Caltharian vessels like empty cans. The Crystalline Collective provided quantum computing power that enhanced all the other weapon systems. Torres coordinated the assault with precision that would have been impossible without human strategic planning. Each species contributed their unique abilities while human commanders ensured that all the different technologies worked together effectively. The Resistance had become a unified fighting force. Chris Parker monitored communications throughout the battle and realized that something had changed in the galaxy.
Species that had been enemies for centuries were fighting side by side against the Empire.
The Caltharian threat had united the galaxy in a way that nothing else ever could. Parker watched as former slaves turned their weapons against their masters with a fury that had been building for decades. Worlds that had been strip-mined and their populations enslaved were getting their revenge. The Empire was learning what it meant to face the combined rage of everyone they had ever oppressed. The tide of battle turned when Torres led a boarding party onto the Emperor's flagship. The strike team included representatives from every liberated world, each one seeking justice for their people. They fought their way through the massive ship's defenses using weapons and tactics shared by their human allies. Emperor Zakthul himself met the boarding party in his throne room, a being of immense power who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. But even his advanced technology could not overcome the determination of species fighting for their freedom. The Emperor fell to weapons wielded by the children of worlds he had destroyed. The Emperor's death was broadcast across the galaxy, showing every species that the seemingly invincible ruler of the Caltharian Empire was just another tyrant who could be overthrown. The psychological effect was enormous as fear of the Empire crumbled and hope for freedom spread to every corner of known space. Morrison established the Galactic Liberation Council with Earth as its headquarters, but not as its ruler. Humanity took on the role of coordinators and mediators, helping former enemies work together to rebuild the galaxy. The goal was not human dominance but genuine cooperation between all species. The former Caltharian territories were divided among their original inhabitants, with human advisors helping to establish new governments and rebuild destroyed worlds. The knowledge and resources hoarded by the Empire were distributed freely, allowing rapid technological advancement for everyone. Maya Rodriguez led the effort to understand and distribute Caltharian technology throughout the galaxy. Weapons of oppression were converted into tools of construction and exploration. Ships designed for conquest became vessels for peaceful trade and scientific research. The instruments of tyranny became the foundation for freedom. Dr. Brooks compiled the final intelligence reports on the Caltharian Empire and realized how fragile their system had actually been. The Empire had controlled the galaxy through fear and overwhelming force, but they had never had the genuine loyalty of their subjects. Once that fear was broken, their collapse was inevitable. Brooks published his findings for every species to read, showing how tyrannies could be recognized and resisted before they became too powerful. The galaxy would never again allow a single species to dominate all others. The lessons learned from fighting the Empire became the foundation for lasting peace. General Foster oversaw the establishment of mutual defense agreements between hundreds of worlds. The new galactic community would protect itself by ensuring that no single species could ever again build the kind of military force that the Empire had possessed. Strength would come from unity, not domination. Captain Grant took command of the new Galactic Patrol, a peacekeeping force composed of volunteers from every member species. Their mission was to prevent future conflicts and ensure that trade routes remained open and safe. The patrol ships carried human coordination technology that allowed perfect cooperation between different species. Palmer continued her research into dimensional physics and developed new technologies that would benefit the entire galaxy. Transportation systems that could move ships instantly between star systems, communication networks that could carry messages across the galaxy in seconds, medical devices that could cure diseases that had plagued various species for millennia. Morrison looked out at the rebuilt galaxy from his office on Earth and reflected on what humanity had accomplished. They had not conquered the galaxy or imposed their will on other species. Instead, they had shown that cooperation was stronger than domination and that freedom was worth any sacrifice. The Admiral wrote his final report to the Galactic Council and summarized. The lessons learned from the war against the Empire. Humanity's greatest strength had not been their technology or their military tactics. It had been their ability to inspire hope in others and to build alliances based on mutual respect rather than fear. The galaxy was now ruled not by fear, but by hope. Not by a single dominant species, but by cooperation between equals. Earth's children had kept their promise to ensure that it stayed that way. The age of tyranny was over, and the age of freedom had begun. Human colonies throughout the galaxy served as centers of learning and cooperation, teaching other species the arts of diplomacy, strategic thinking, and technological innovation. But they also learned from their alien friends, creating a rich exchange of knowledge and culture that made everyone stronger. The story of Earth's resistance became legend, told on thousands of worlds as an example of what could be accomplished when free beings stood together against oppression. The galaxy remembered that some species could not be conquered, and some values were worth dying to defend.